The crack of a rifle shot split the morning air as Zachary Thornton watched the bank robber crumple to the dusty street of Rhyolite, Nevada. The year was 1876, and the booming silver mining town had seen its share of outlaws, but none as determined or as dead as the man now bleeding into the dirt. Zachary holstered his smoking Colt and adjusted his hat, revealing piercing blue eyes that had seen too much for a man of 28 years. "Obliged, Thornton," Sheriff Mills called out, approaching the body with caution. "That's the third one you've brought down this month. Maybe now folks can sleep easier." Zachary merely nodded, his expression betraying nothing of the weariness that had settled deep in his bones. 6 years of bounty hunting had hardened him, turned him into something he barely recognized when he looked in the mirror each morning. "Your reputation's growing," Mills continued, kneeling beside the dead man. "Pretty soon, outlaws will avoid Nevada territory altogether just hearing your name." "That's the idea," Zachary replied, his voice like gravel. He turned to leave when the sheriff's next words stopped him cold. "Say you heard about old man Vance. Passed 3 days ago. Heart gave out." Zachary paused. "Can't say I knew him well." "Well enough to know he's got that pretty daughter, Delilah. 22 years old and now sole owner of the largest ranch in the county. Can't imagine how long she'll keep it without a husband." Something like annoyance flickered across Zachary's face. "Not my concern, Sheriff." But as Zachary strode toward the saloon, he couldn't help but think of Delilah Vance. He'd seen her in town a handful of times, raven-haired and fiercely independent, managing her father's affairs while the old man's health declined. The Vance Ranch, Silver Creek, was the envy of every cattleman for 100 miles, and now it belonged to her. The saloon was nearly empty this early in the day. Zachary ordered whiskey and took it to a corner table away from the windows. He preferred shadows these days. "Mr. Thornton." He looked up to find Delilah Vance herself standing before him, dressed in a simple black mourning dress that did little to diminish her beauty. Her dark eyes were rimmed red, but her posture remained straight as a fence post. "Miss Vance," he acknowledged, rising slightly. "My condolences for your father." "Save them," she said, sliding into the chair across from him without invitation. "I need to discuss business." Zachary raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I need a husband," she stated plainly, watching his expression. "Or at least, I need to appear to have one." He nearly choked on his whiskey. "I believe the general store sells dress mannequins." "Don't be obtuse," she snapped. "The vultures are circling. Banker Williams has already hinted that a woman can't possibly handle the ranch's loans. 2 neighboring ranchers have made insulting offers for my land, and Judge Patterson suggested I might consider marrying his 40-year-old son. And this concerns me how exactly, Miss Vance. I'm offering you a business arrangement," she said, lowering her voice. "Marry me in name only and I'll pay you handsomely. $5,000 for 1 year of marriage. You'll have your own quarters, of course." Zachary stared at her, trying to determine if she'd lost her mind. "Why me?" "There must be dozens of men in this territory who'd jump at the chance to marry you properly." "Because you're the only man they fear," she answered simply. "Your reputation would keep them at bay, and because I don't believe you're interested in taking over my ranch or my life. You strike me as a man with other plans." He laughed without humor. "And what makes you think I have any interest in pretending to be anyone's husband? The bounty on Jim Blackwell," she said, watching his face carefully. "I know you've been tracking him for 2 years. My father told me what Blackwell did to your family in Kansas." Zachary's expression hardened. "That's not something I discuss. You don't have to. But I do know that Blackwell's gang was spotted near the Arizona border. $5,000 would buy a lot of ammunition and information." He studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes. "And after a year, we quietly dissolved the arrangement. I'll have established myself as capable of running Silver Creek, and you'll have your money to continue your hunt." Zachary downed the rest of his whiskey. "This marriage is just for appearances," he said flatly. "Nothing more." "Nothing more," she agreed, extending her hand as if to seal a cattle deal. He hesitated before taking it. Her skin was soft but her grip firm. Something stirred in his chest, something he thought had died long ago in Kansas. He quickly released her hand. "I'll have my lawyer draw up an agreement," she said, rising from the table. "The wedding should be this Sunday. People need to believe it's real." 3 days later, Zachary stood beside Delilah in the small Rhyolite church, reciting vows he had no intention of honoring. She wore a simple blue dress rather than black, and he had to admit she was beautiful in the objective way one might admire a painting or a sunset. Her hand trembled slightly as he slid a plain gold band onto her finger. His own remained steady. The small gathering of townspeople seemed pleased enough, though he caught whispers about the haste of the arrangement. No doubt rumors would spread about Delilah's virtue, but that was her problem. As they walked out into the bright Nevada sunlight as husband and wife, Zachary felt strangely disconnected from the moment, as if watching himself from a distance. "Remember to smile," Delilah whispered through her own forced grin. "They need to believe we're madly in love." Zachary managed something that might have passed for a smile. "1 year," he muttered as they climbed into the wagon that would take them to Silver Creek. 1 year, she agreed. The journey to Silver Creek took just over an hour. As they crested the final hill, Zachary had to admit the ranch was impressive. A large 2-story house stood proudly against the backdrop of mountains, with various outbuildings and corrals spread across the property. Cattle dotted the grasslands, and a creek, presumably Silver Creek itself, wound through the valley. "Home sweet home," Delilah said without irony as she guided the wagon toward the house. Several ranch hands had gathered to greet them, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Zachary recognized their type, immediately loyal to the Vance name but uncertain about this stranger who had suddenly married the boss's daughter. An older man with a weathered face stepped forward. "Miss Delilah," he began, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Thornton, welcome home." "Thank you, Frank," Delilah replied warmly. "I'd like you all to meet my husband, Zachary Thornton." Zachary nodded to the assembled men, maintaining his stoic expression. He could tell they were assessing him, wondering what kind of man he was. Good. Let them wonder. Let them fear. "Frank Morgan is our foreman," Delilah explained. "He's been with Silver Creek since before I was born." "Sir," Frank acknowledged with a nod. After brief introductions to the other men, Delilah led Zachary into the house. It was well appointed but not ostentatious, with solid furniture and practical touches that spoke of the elder Vance's sensibilities. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Delilah said as a young Mexican woman took Zachary's meager belongings. "Maria will show you. Dinner is at 6. "And your room?" he asked, more out of curiosity than anything else, across the hall. She met his gaze directly. "As we agreed." The first week passed in awkward formality. Zachary spent his days learning the layout of the ranch, observing the operations, and cleaning his guns. Delilah managed the business aspects with impressive efficiency, reviewing ledgers and giving instructions to the foreman. They barely spoke beyond necessary pleasantries, taking meals together in strained silence before retreating to their separate rooms. It was during the second week that trouble arrived in the form of Harold Williams, the banker from Rhyolite. Zachary was returning from a ride around the property perimeter when he saw Williams's buggy parked outside the house. Inside, he found Delilah and Williams in the study, voices raised. "Mrs. Thornton, be reasonable," Williams was saying, his jowly face flushed with frustration. "Your father's loan comes due next month. Without him to oversee operations, the bank must consider our position." "Our position is excellent," Delilah replied coolly. "The spring drive will more than cover the payment, as you well know. Perhaps in your father's hands," but Williams stopped abruptly as he noticed Zachary in the doorway. "Ah, Mr. Thornton, perhaps you can talk sense into your wife." Zachary leaned against the doorframe, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. "My wife doesn't need sense talked into her. She understands business better than most men I've met." Williams puffed up indignantly. "This isn't about her understanding. It's about capability. Running a ranch of this size requires a firm hand." "Her hand seems firm enough to me," Zachary drawled. "And now she has mine as well. Is there a problem with that arrangement, Mr. Williams?" The banker's eyes flicked nervously to Zachary's gun. "No, no problem. I simply wanted to discuss terms." "The terms remain as they were with my father," Delilah interjected. "The loan will be paid on time with interest." After Williams departed, visibly deflated, Delilah turned to Zachary with a small smile. "Thank you," he shrugged. "Part of our arrangement, isn't it, keeping the vultures at bay?" "Yes, but still, thank you," she hesitated. "Would you like to join me for a ride tomorrow? I should show you the north pastures if you're to be convincing as the ranch's new co-owner." Zachary nodded. "Makes sense." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Zachary met Delilah at the stables, where she had already saddled 2 horses, a spirited bay mare for herself, and a solid buckskin gelding for him. "Hope you can ride," she said with a hint of challenge in her voice. "Well enough," he replied, mounting smoothly. As they rode away from the ranch house, Zachary felt himself relaxing slightly. Being in the saddle had always brought him peace, even during his darkest days. Beside him, Delilah rode with the easy confidence of someone raised in the saddle, her back straight, her hands light on the reins. They rode in companionable silence for nearly an hour, crossing meadows dotted with wildflowers and following the winding path of Silver Creek. Finally, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of grassland where hundreds of cattle grazed. "This is the heart of Silver Creek," Delilah said, pride evident in her voice. "The best grazing land in the county. My grandfather claimed this land back in '49, before most folks even knew Nevada existed." "It's impressive," Zachary admitted. "How many head are you running?" "About 2,000. We lost some to wolves last winter, but the spring calving was good." She paused, studying him. "You know something about cattle." "Grew up on a small spread in Kansas," he said shortly, not wanting to invite more questions about his past. But Delilah seemed to sense his reluctance and changed the subject. "Over there," she pointed to the west. "That's where Johnson's ranch begins. He's been trying to buy our water rights for years. My father always refused. And now he thinks you'll be easier to convince," she nodded. "Him and others. That's why," she broke off as the sound of gunfire echoed across the valley. Zachary's hand flew to his gun as he scanned the horizon. "Get down," he ordered, dismounting and pulling Delilah from her saddle in one swift motion. They crouched behind a large boulder as more shots rang out. Peering cautiously around the edge, Zachary spotted 3 riders in the distance, firing at a small herd of cattle. The animals were panicking, stampeding toward a ravine. "Rustlers," Delilah whispered. "No," Zachary replied grimly. "They're driving your cattle over that cliff. They don't want to steal them, they want to destroy them." Anger flashed in Delilah's eyes. "Johnson, maybe, stay here." Before she could protest, Zachary was back on his horse, spurring the buckskin into a gallop. He approached from the side, using the terrain for cover until he was close enough to take aim. His first shot caught one of the riders in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. The other two wheeled around, guns drawn, but Zachary was already firing again. One rider went down with a bullet to the leg. The third turned to flee, but Zachary pursued, closing the distance rapidly. Rather than shoot the man in the back, he spurred his horse alongside and lunged, tackling the rustler from his saddle. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dirt. The man was younger than Zachary but strong, landing a solid punch to his jaw before Zachary could pin him down. "Who sent you?" Zachary demanded, pressing his forearm against the man's throat. "Go to hell," the rustler spat. Zachary pressed harder. "Last chance." Fear replaced defiance in the young man's eyes. "Johnson said he'd pay us $50 each to scare the widow Vance." "She's not a widow," Zachary growled. "She's my wife. And you tell Johnson that if he touches one head of our cattle again, I'll put a bullet between his eyes." By the time Zachary had tied up all three men, Delilah had arrived, her rifle in hand. She surveyed the scene with a mixture of anger and admiration. "I thought I told you to stay put," Zachary said. "And I thought this was a partnership," she countered, "even if it is just for appearances." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. The sun caught in her dark hair, and her cheeks were flushed with emotion. For a moment, he saw past the business arrangement to the woman underneath, brave, determined, and undeniably beautiful. He quickly looked away. "We should get these men to the sheriff." They delivered the rustlers to Sheriff Mills in Rhyolite, who promised to hold them until the circuit judge arrived. As they rode back to Silver Creek in the fading light, Delilah broke the silence. "You were impressive today." Zachary shrugged. "Just doing what I was paid for." "Is that all it was?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately, unsure himself of the rush of protective fury he'd felt when he saw the threat to her ranch to her. "It's what it has to be," he finally said. That night, for the first time, they ate dinner in genuine conversation rather than strained silence. Delilah spoke of her childhood at Silver Creek, of learning the business from her father, of her dreams for the ranch's future. Zachary mostly listened, offering occasional comments or questions but never sharing his own past. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Delilah asked, "Will you tell me about them? Your family in Kansas?" Zachary stiffened. "No, I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "I shouldn't pry," he sighed, the weight of memory pressing down on him. "It was a long time ago." "Not so long that it doesn't still hurt," she observed softly. Their eyes met in the darkness, and for a brief moment, Zachary felt the walls he'd built around his heart tremble. But then he stood abruptly. "Good night, Delilah." "Good night, Zachary." As spring turned to summer, a rhythm developed at Silver Creek. Zachary found himself increasingly involved in the ranch operations, riding with the hands, helping with cattle, even offering suggestions for improving security along the property boundaries. Delilah continued managing the books and business dealings, but now she consulted him, valued his opinion. They still maintained separate rooms, separate lives in many ways, but something was changing between them, a gradual softening, a tentative trust. They took meals together, shared the events of their days, occasionally rode out together to inspect the far reaches of the ranch. Zachary tried to tell himself it was all part of maintaining appearances, but he knew that wasn't entirely true. He found himself watching Delilah when she wasn't looking, the graceful way she moved, the intelligence in her eyes, the rare but radiant smile that transformed her face. One sweltering July afternoon, they rode to Silver Creek itself to escape the heat. The water sparkled invitingly in the sunlight, and without preamble, Delilah dismounted and began removing her boots. "What are you doing?" Zachary asked, though it was obvious. "Going for a swim," she replied simply. "I used to come here all the time as a child." He watched, transfixed, as she waded into the creek in her dress, sighing with pleasure as the cool water enveloped her to the waist. "Are you coming in?" She called over her shoulder, a playful note in her voice he'd never heard before. "I'll keep watch," he said, dismounting and settling beneath a cottonwood tree. "Suit yourself," she laughed, then ducked completely under the water. When she emerged, her dark hair streaming, her dress clinging to her body, something twisted in Zachary's chest. She was beautiful and alive in a way that made his carefully constructed indifference impossible to maintain. "You're missing out," she called, splashing water in his direction. Before he could reconsider, Zachary was removing his boots and gun belt. He waded in still wearing his trousers and shirt, the cool water a shock against his skin. Delilah's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with delight. "I didn't think you would actually," her words cut off as he splashed her, a boyish impulse he hadn't felt in years. "Oh," she gasped, then immediately retaliated, sending a wave of water toward his face. For several minutes, they were like children, splashing and laughing, the weight of their complicated arrangement temporarily forgotten. When they finally called a truce, both soaking wet and breathless with laughter, they found themselves standing too close in the middle of the creek. Water droplets clung to Delilah's eyelashes, and a strand of wet hair was plastered to her cheek. Without thinking, Zachary reached out to brush it away. His fingers lingered against her skin, and her smile faded into something more serious, more questioning. For one heart-stopping moment, he thought he might kiss her. He wanted to the realization hitting him with the force of a bullet. But instead, he stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should head back," he said gruffly. "It'll be dark soon." The ride home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before, charged with unspoken feelings and possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. That night, Zachary lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the emotions churning inside him. This marriage was just for appearances, that's what he'd told himself, told her. That was their agreement. But his heart, it seemed, hadn't gotten the message. The next morning, a letter arrived that changed everything. Zachary recognized the handwriting of an old friend who had been keeping an eye out for Jim Blackwell's movements. Blackwell and his gang had been spotted in a small town just across the California border, less than 3 days' ride from Rhyolite. Zachary read the letter 3 times, his pulse quickening with each reading. 2 years of searching, of following cold trails and false leads, and now Blackwell was practically in his backyard. The man who had murdered his parents and sister, who had laughed while their farmhouse burned with them inside it, was finally within reach. He found Delilah in the study, reviewing cattle sale contracts. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I have to leave," he said, handing her the letter. "Today." She read it quickly, her face paling. "Blackwell." "This is why I took your offer, Delilah, for this moment." She stood, placing the letter on the desk with deliberate care. "I understand. When will you return? I don't know." The truth was, he hadn't thought beyond finding Blackwell and ending him. "Maybe I won't," her eyes flashed. "What does that mean?" "It means Blackwell doesn't travel alone. His gang is loyal and deadly. The odds aren't exactly in my favor." "So you're riding to your death," she said flatly. "I'm riding to justice," he corrected. "Something I've been seeking for 6 years." "And what about our arrangement, the ranch?" "You're doing fine without me, Delilah. The men respect you. Williams backed down. Johnson won't try anything again after what happened to his hired guns." That's not, she stopped, visibly collecting herself. When do you leave? Within the hour. She nodded stiffly. Then I wish you luck, Mr. Thornton. The formality stung more than he expected. Delilah, no, she cut him off. You made our arrangement very clear from the beginning. This marriage is just for appearances, nothing more. I have no claim on you or your decisions. She turned away, but not before he caught the glimmer of tears in her eyes. Something twisted in his chest, regret, confusion, a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I have to do this, he said softly. I can't rest until he's paid for what he did. I know, she replied without turning. I just thought. Never mind what I thought. Goodbye, Zachary. He left her standing in the study, her back straight and proud despite the hurt he knew he was causing. As he packed his few belongings and saddled his horse, he told himself this was for the best. Delilah deserved more than a man consumed by vengeance, and he'd never promised her anything beyond their business arrangement. But as he rode away from Silver Creek, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. The trail to Blackwell led Zachary through rugged terrain and small mining settlements, following information gleaned from reluctant bartenders and frightened townspeople. Blackwell's reputation for brutality had only grown over the years, leaving a wake of terror wherever he went. 4 days into his journey, Zachary found himself in a decrepit saloon in a nameless mining camp, listening to a nervous prospector describe a group of men who had passed through 2 days prior. Mean-looking bunch, the old man whispered, clutching his whiskey. The leader had a scar across his throat, like someone tried to cut it once. That was Blackwell, all right. Zachary had put that scar there himself during their first and only encounter, before Blackwell's men had overwhelmed him and left him for dead. Which way were they headed? Zachary asked, sliding another coin across the table. South, toward the old Hanson mine. Abandoned now, but the buildings are still standing. Good place to hide out. Zachary rode through the night, pushing his horse harder than he should have, driven by a burning need to finally end this chapter of his life. As dawn broke, he spotted the rusted equipment and collapsing structures of the Hanson mine in the distance. He approached cautiously, dismounting and securing his horse in a stand of scrub pine before continuing on foot. Smoke rose from the chimney of what had once been the mine office, and 4 horses were tethered nearby. One fewer than he'd expected, but perhaps Blackwell had sent a man to town. Crouching behind an overturned ore cart, Zachary watched the building for nearly an hour, noting the occasional movement at the windows. He counted 3 distinct shadows, still one short of what he'd heard about Blackwell's current gang. He was considering his approach when the decision was made for him. The door of the office swung open, and Jim Blackwell himself stepped out, stretching in the morning sun. The scar across his throat was livid against his tanned skin, and his gun belt hung low on his hips. Zachary raised his rifle, centering the sight on Blackwell's chest. 1 shot. That's all it would take to end 6 years of nightmares. His finger tightened on the trigger. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Thornton. The voice came from behind him, cold and amused. Zachary froze, recognizing his critical error. The 4th man hadn't gone to town. He'd been patrolling the perimeter. Stand up nice and slow. Toss that rifle aside. Zachary complied, turning to face a wiry man with a pockmarked face and a Remington revolver aimed steadily at his head. Well, look what we found, Jim, the man called out. It's your old friend from Kansas. Blackwell's laugh carried across the distance between them. Well, I'll be damned. Bring him in, Roy. I want to say hello properly. The next few minutes were a blur of rough hands and gun barrels as Zachary was disarmed, searched, and marched into the mine office. Inside, 2 more men lounged at a table playing cards, both reaching for their weapons as Zachary was shoved through the door. "Easy, boys," Blackwell said, following them in. "Let's not be hasty. We've got a reunion to enjoy." He circled Zachary slowly, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. 6 years I've been looking over my shoulder for you, Thornton. 6 years of wondering when you'd show up again." He touched the scar on his throat. "You nearly got me that time. I've always admired your determination." "You murdered my family," Zachary said, his voice deadly calm despite the rage boiling inside him. "Burned them alive." "Business," Blackwell shrugged. "Your father should have sold us those horses when we asked nice. Nothing personal." "It's personal to me." Blackwell laughed again. "I can see that. Well, this reunion is touching, but I'm afraid it's going to be short." He drew his revolver. "Any last words before you join your family?" Zachary stared into the eyes of the man who had haunted his dreams for 6 years, and found himself thinking not of his dead family but of Delilah, her smile at Silver Creek, her strength in the face of challenges, the hurt in her eyes when he left. "Just get it over with," he growled. Blackwell cocked his revolver, aiming it at Zachary's head. "Goodbye." Thorn, the window behind him, exploded inward as a shot rang out. Blackwell staggered, a red stain blossoming on his shirt. Chaos erupted as the other men reached for their guns. Zachary took advantage of the confusion to slam his head into Roy's face, snatching the man's dropped revolver as he fell. 2 more shots came through different windows. One of the card players went down clutching his leg. The other returned fire blindly toward the windows. Zachary dove behind an overturned desk as Blackwell, wounded but still dangerous, fired in his direction. The bullets splintered the wood near his head. "Come out and die like a man, Thornton," Blackwell shouted, his voice strained with pain and fury. Instead, Zachary rolled to the side and fired twice. The first bullet missed, the second caught Blackwell in the chest. He staggered but remained standing, raising his gun for another shot. Before he could fire, a third bullet hit him from outside, spinning him around. He collapsed to his knees, then fell face forward onto the dirty floor. In the sudden silence, Zachary heard the remaining gang members' ragged breathing. The man had both hands raised in surrender. The door burst open, and Zachary swung his gun toward the sound, finger tensing on the trigger. He froze when he saw who stood there. Delilah. She stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes blazing with determination. Behind her, Frank and 2 other Silver Creek ranch hands entered cautiously, their weapons trained on the surviving outlaws. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, looking him over for injuries. "No," he managed, still struggling to comprehend her presence. "How did you're not as subtle as you think when gathering information," she said. "We've been half a day behind you since you left." Zachary looked from her to Blackwell's motionless body, then back to her. "You killed him." "We all took shots," she said simply. "Does it matter whose bullet did it?" It didn't, he realized. Blackwell was dead, his family avenged. The mission that had consumed him for 6 years was over, and he felt empty. The satisfaction he'd expected was absent, replaced by a hollow feeling that echoed with all he'd sacrificed in pursuit of this moment. All except Delilah, who stood before him now, having risked her life to save his. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you follow me?" Her expression softened. "Because despite what you said, this marriage isn't just for appearances. Not to me." The emptiness inside him began to fill with something warm and unfamiliar, hope, perhaps, or the beginnings of love. Frank cleared his throat. "We should get these 2 into town," he said, gesturing to the surviving outlaws. "Sheriff will want to deal with them." Zachary nodded, not taking his eyes off Delilah. "We'll meet you there." When the others had gone, taking the prisoners and Blackwell's body with them, Zachary and Delilah stood alone in the abandoned mine office, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. "You could have been killed," he said finally. "So could you," she countered. "Would have been if we hadn't followed you." Delilah, he stopped, struggling to find words for the emotions churning inside him. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate." "Then don't thank me," she said, stepping closer. "Come home instead." "Home," he repeated, testing the word. He hadn't had a home since Kansas, hadn't allowed himself to think he deserved one. "Silver Creek," she clarified. "With me. Not as a business arrangement, but as a real husband, if that's something you want." He closed the distance between them, reaching out to touch her cheek with a gentleness he'd forgotten he possessed. "I think I've wanted it since that day at the creek," he admitted. "Maybe even before. I just didn't believe I could have it until Blackwell was gone. And now." She whispered, her eyes searching his face. "Now I want to try," he said honestly. "I can't promise I'll be good at it, being a husband, being happy. It's been a long time." Her smile was like sunrise breaking across the horizon. "We'll learn together." When he finally kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long, treacherous journey, like redemption and promise all at once. Her lips were soft beneath his, her body fitting perfectly against him as she wound her arms around his neck. They returned to Silver Creek 3 days later, after giving their statements to the sheriff and identifying Blackwell's body for the territorial marshal. Word of Blackwell's death had spread quickly, and with it, Zachary's part in ending the notorious outlaw's reign of terror. As they rode through the ranch gate, side by side this time, Zachary looked at the house with new eyes. No longer just a place he was passing through, but a home he was returning to. "What happens now?" he asked as they dismounted. Delilah took his hand, leading him toward the house. "Now we live, Zachary, together." That evening they sat on the porch watching the sunset, fingers intertwined. The weight of vengeance had lifted from Zachary's shoulders, leaving room for something he'd thought forever lost: peace. "I never told you about my family," he said quietly. "My father was a horse breeder in Kansas. My mother taught at the local school. My sister, Rebecca, was only 16 when Blackwell came." Delilah squeezed his hand, silently encouraging him to continue. "They were good people, kind people. They didn't deserve what happened to them." He paused, memories washing over him. "After they died, I couldn't see past my need for revenge. It consumed everything else." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think they'd want me to live again, to build something, not just destroy." He turned to look at her, the dying sunlight catching in her dark hair. "I think they would have loved you." Her smile was tender. "I wish I could have known them. So do I." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "But I'm grateful for you, Delilah. For finding me when I wasn't looking to be found." As darkness fell, they moved inside, no longer to separate rooms but to the master bedroom they would now share. Their lovemaking was tentative at first, then passionate, a physical expression of the emotions that had been building between them for months. Afterward, as Delilah slept in his arms, Zachary marveled at the turn his life had taken. He had come to Rhyolite hunting a killer, and instead found a future he never dared imagine for himself. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Silver Creek prospered under their joint stewardship, expanding its operations and earning a reputation as one of the finest ranches in Nevada territory. Delilah's business acumen combined with Zachary's practical knowledge proved a formidable combination. They welcomed their first child, a son they named Michael after Delilah's father, 18 months after Blackwell's death. A daughter, Rebecca, named for Zachary's sister, followed 2 years later. Watching his children grow, teaching them to ride and respecting their mother's insistence on education, Zachary discovered depths of love he hadn't known existed. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood on the same ridge where they had witnessed Johnson's men attempting to drive cattle over the cliff the day something had shifted between them. "You ever think about our agreement?" Delilah asked, leaning against him as they surveyed their land. "1 year of marriage just for appearances," Zachary laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Best business deal I ever made. Even though you never collected your $5,000, she teased. "I got something far more valuable instead," he replied, turning her to face him. The years had only enhanced her beauty, adding character and confidence to her features. "I got you, our children, this life." "This life," she echoed, her eyes full of love. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here that day in the saloon?" "Not once," he admitted. "I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. And now I see everything clearly," he said, drawing her close. "I see a future I never thought I'd have, with a woman I never dreamed I'd love." As they rode home to their children, Zachary reflected on the strange, winding path that had led him to this moment. He had said those words so definitively in the saloon years ago. "This marriage is just for appearances." How wrong he had been. His heart, it seemed, had known better all along. And for that, he would be forever grateful.